And they did like hundreds of thousands of them. And this application allows you to automate a very boring and repetitive process and outsource it to a lot of people. I'm not feeling like I'm very clear. Did you get my explanation or not really? An example, yeah. So imagine you are, imagine suddenly, I take a stupid example, but you receive 100 pictures, and you know that half of them are pictures of business cards, and that half of them are pictures of not business cards. And you want to identify which ones are business cards and which ones are not. So you just upload your 100 pictures in there, and Mechanical Turk is going to create a new job. Say, Laurent has a small job. He pays 5 cents by picture. And the job is to separate among 100 pictures the ones that are business cards and the ones that are not business cards. And so this kind of, you can outsource, you can crowdsource, you can hire somebody. Some people are going to work for you, but you don't know who they are. And they're going to do a very simple task for you. And it's a way to, you can actually put that into a computer program. So this can be part of a longer process on your website, like a publication process. You can have some people reviewing comments on your website, for example. So it's a way to put workers and bosses together and have them work. And there are a lot of new systems like that to exchange money or to exchange work or to do some trading. You have some bartering systems emerging now, boosted by the crisis. In France, there's a big example called CERN. Basically, CERN is that you say, I'm willing to go and wash the floor of somebody's house for 2 hours. And so there, you have an equivalent in CERN, which is like a currency. And then you can exchange that against some apples or another service. And so you have a lot of people who are trading stuff like this. And this is quite important. Another example is Skype Prime. It's a service by Skype where you can basically charge people for calling you. So you say, I'm an expert in whatever field, and you call me, and you're going to be charged for every minute that we spend on the phone, and then you can make money like that. And it totally escapes the traditional economic system, and you don't pay taxes on it, of course. So these were the points I wanted to make about business, the evolution of business, some points about the evolution of business. Now about social evolutions. One of the biggest one, of course, is transparency and openness. So transparency, this is a screenshot of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is a website where when you have some very confidential documents you get from somehow that fell from a truck, as we say in France, you basically, you can send them to WikiLeaks, who's going to publish them anonymously. And there is a Swiss bank who got caught into doing some money laundering because actually they fired an ex-manager, and he was very mad, and he had some documents on a USB key, so he uploaded all the documents on WikiLeaks, and suddenly you have this whole issue that you have to deal with. And we live in a much more transparent society now, whether we like it or not, and you have to keep that in mind. Maybe you know this guy. Very interesting experiment they did. One of the things that everybody talks about, and I think in newspaper it's been a huge debate, it's about opening up to the people, to people's contribution. This is a very good idea. But I think now we start to realize that openness does not scale well. It's great to have comments, but it's not great when you start to have 103,000 questions asked to you. What are you going to do with that? You know? So he actually ended up answering 3 questions. So that means 103, 975 questions were unanswered. That's where openness becomes unproductive. And we had a case at Lyft that Lyft started 4 years ago and suddenly became a more renowned conference. And from the beginning, we said anybody can call me and say he wants to speak, and we're going to review his application and maybe invite them to speak. So when we were a very little known conference, it was working very well. And now that it's a more known conference, we had a case 3 months ago where we would get 20 suggestions per day. And 20 is the number of speakers we have into one edition. So I had to turn down everybody, of course. It's like mathematical, you know. I cannot accept everybody. So people were mad at me. So also I'm not good enough to speak at least. No, it has nothing to do with that. We just don't have enough spots. So you have to be very careful when you open to the people, because at some point it can become very, very unproductive. And actually people start to hate you when you don't answer the question, because they put some time in it. And there is no equal relationship, because you cannot give them back what they are looking for. Look at what happened with the Facebook terms. So Facebook published their terms, and they changed it, and suddenly they had this like rebellion of users, and they went back. I think you probably heard that story. Again, I think that if you ask 3 or 4 years ago to people, what do they want with a social network, they would never have thought of Facebook. So there is a lot of limits into asking people what they want, and also sometimes we get overwhelmed by a very small minority. It's like in France. You have 1,000 taxi drivers who can block the city. So the government thinks everybody's mad, but it's only a small portion of people who make a lot of noise. And you have 99% of people who agree with you, but they don't say nothing. And you can really lose that, that notion when you face a lot of openness and when you are really somehow a bit under attack. Another interesting social evolution, I think, is the fact that governments are a bit losing the battle for change. This is an example that made me laugh. So there was this big announcement in France of they launching cyberdouane, which is like cyber customs. So they want to fight trafficking of drugs, medication, fake products, tobacco, weapons, munitions, art, blah, blah. And you start reading. With 8 staff members and 7 enquêteurs, which is, I don't know what you say, but like they have 15 people to fight that. They're just behind the world, the way the world works. And the subprime crisis was very interesting because what happens? In France, I think there are 150 cops working on controlling the financial market. And there are 10 of thousands of cops fighting to kick the refugees out of the countries. And I think maybe one trader in one bad trade can cost 10 times the price of all the refugees in 1 year in the country. But it's totally inadapted, and governments really right now are struggling to keep up with the reality of the world and the reality of the threats that are facing us because of innovation. Another example, I give you 2 examples from Korea. The first one is that last year, the Korean president allowed, as a gesture toward the US, he allowed again the import of US beef. And because he wanted to be friends with George Bush, he thought he was very cool, blah, blah, blah. And basically, Koreans are very, very concerned about what they eat. And people were not happy with this allowance of bringing beef back to the Korean market. And also there was a report of a death because of the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And so suddenly you had people complaining in online forums, and they started to set a date for a protest. And the day of the protest, they had 1 million people in the streets. Totally unnoticed. The government was unaware of it. So it became a huge problem just because the government had lost a bit touch with their citizens. And of course, it started a big movement, and there were a lot of troubles. Another thing about that, how innovation kind of poses threats to government. Another example, also from Korea, is that 2 years ago in Korea, they started to notice a rush of suicides among famous people. And they had some, like the top actress of the country committed suicide actually 6 months ago. And they realized that it was because of online harassment. So when you're famous, all the discussion happens online. Most of the discussion happens online in Korea. And so when you're famous, you start to have a lot of people discussing about you. And of course, when you're behind your computer and it's anonymous, it's very easy to be very mean to people, to speak in a politically correct way. And Korea is a culture where you should not lose face. So you never say no, and you try not to disagree. So you should really keep your face up. And these famous people could not, because they were totally harassed online and